Hi, this is Stuart Malina, Principal Guest Conductor of the Florida Orchestra, speaking to you from Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, from my home. I'm very sad that I'm unable to come down to Florida this spring to conduct the orchestra, but I'm very delighted at the same time to be able to introduce this broadcast of the Masterworks concert that I did with the orchestra several months ago. It was a program of all-American music, and in putting this program together, we started with the concerto. We knew that we would be having the Rascher Quartet, one of the world's great saxophone quartets, playing with the orchestra, and we chose for this collaboration a piece that was written for them, a saxophone quartet concerto by the great American composer Philip Glass. Now, Philip Glass is a minimalist composer. Most everything that he wrote is minimalist music, meaning music that's made up of small patterns of music that repeat again and again and again and shift in small ways over the course of time. But I think this piece is a little bit different in a certain sense because it's a piece that has an extremely strong emotional component. Right from the very beginning, you have a first movement that's rather dolorous, a second movement that's highly explosive and driven, a third movement that's extremely lyrical, and a final movement that I can describe in no other way than as just exultant, extremely joyful. This collaboration was a very exciting one for me. I very much enjoyed the four players of the quartet. And I also was delighted with the ensemble between the quartet and the orchestra in this sometimes very tricky piece. As you'll hear in the second and fourth movements, the rhythms are not straightforward. There are lots of complex rhythms of measures of 7, measures of 5, measures of 4 and 3, scattered together in different patterns. And I have to say that I thought the orchestra really came to bat, and it was a wonderful performance of this really wonderful piece. And so what do you pair with the Glass Saxophone Quartet Concerto? Well, my first thought was George Gershwin's American in Paris, one of his great orchestral works. And the reason was that it's a piece that has, in addition to the orchestra, 3 saxophone players. And so we approached the Rascher Quartet and asked them if they would be willing to stay on and play as the saxophone trio in American in Paris. And they were gracious enough to say yes. In fact, I think they were delighted to do so. In chatting with them after the concert, one of them said that they felt that it was just wonderful to be able to be back in an orchestra. It's an experience they don't get to do all that much. And so anyway, so we chose American in Paris. Now, American in Paris is extremely well known in this country. It's one of George Gershwin's most popular pieces, possibly because of its use in the movie of the same name. But I think that it's a significant work for George Gershwin. He faced a lot of criticism early on in his life that he was a weak orchestrator. And American in Paris was his first major work that he did all of the orchestration himself. Unlike Rhapsody in Blue, which was first the Paul Whiteman Band, a jazz band, not quite the same thing, and then the orchestrated version that we know so well was done by Ferd Groffet. American in Paris was conceived by Gershwin and completed by Gershwin alone. It was a piece that was a reflection on his time in Paris. He made 2 trips to Paris over the course of his life, both times searching out a teacher. George Gershwin was, as accomplished as he was a lifelong learner and always felt that there was more that he could learn about composition, about orchestration, about music theory. There are famous stories about him meeting with Ravel, famous stories of him searching out Nadia Boulanger. But he loved Paris, he loved the sights and the sounds, and created this piece, which tells somewhat the story of an American in Paris, having the time of his life and seeing all the sights. And then about midway through the piece, he becomes homesick. And at this point, you have an achingly beautiful blues melody that's played by the principal trumpeter. And in this performance, you'll hear our spectacular principal trumpeter, Rob Smith, do a wonderful job of this beautiful solo. Now, the solo is significant in that you hear Gershwin as the great melodist that he was. Gershwin had many strengths, but none as great as his ability to spin a beautiful melody. I'd put him in my top handful or so of great melodists of all time. But the other thing that you'll hear in this piece is taxi horns. On his return from Paris on one of his trips, he brought back a bunch of taxi horns with him and incorporated them into this piece. So you'll be hearing actual taxi horns from the orchestra. It's a delightful work. It was a great way to finish this program. So having designed the second half of the program with the glass and the Gershwin, I thought it would be appropriate to do something a little bit more contemporary, something that was written, let's say, in the last 20, 25 years. And so I went to the internet to look at some new music that I might not be familiar with. And I came upon an article which was interviews with 12 great American composers, asking them what their favorite symphonic work is by an American composer. And I was particularly interested in what Jennifer Higdon had to say, firstly because Jennifer is a good friend of mine and I've done a whole bunch of her music, but also because she's a really smart musician, and I was interested in what her opinion would be. And what she said was Christopher Theophanidis' first symphony. Now, Chris Theophanidis is a composer whose work I've done many times, and I had just, within the last year, done the world premiere of a new piano concerto by him. And so I went and listened to this piece, and boy, what a phenomenal work of composition this piece is. It truly takes you on an amazing journey and an amazing soundscape. He's able to combine sounds in the orchestra in a very unique way. His music doesn't sound like anybody else's music, but he's able to create beautiful melodies, very evocative emotions, and take you on this ride through music. Now, there are places where you'll hear things and think that it might have a meaning, some kind of an emotional component, or tell a story. The very beginning, for example, is a unison melody in the Woodwinds, and in my mind, when I first heard it, it sounded somewhat Native American. But Chris, in speaking about this piece, maintains that there is really no story to the piece. It's a piece that takes you through musical soundscapes. It's a musical piece for its own sake. And it really is a wonderful ride. It'll take you through a whole bunch of different emotions. And you'll also have major extremes. The loud parts of the piece are crushingly loud, and the softest parts are extremely serene. The other thing that I'll mention in introducing this piece is that it really uses a huge, wide array of percussion instruments. At several points in the piece, you'll hear 4 different sets of tubular bells being played at once, which creates this, on the one hand, almost cacophony, but ordered cacophony, and kind of this extremely complex sound that you'll get from the percussion supporting the melodies that are playing in the orchestra. I hope you'll enjoy the performance as much as we enjoyed playing it for you. I have to praise the orchestra because they were absolutely sensational putting this piece together. The last piece on the program needed to be American, and it needed to be short, and it needed to be an opener. And when I think about short American openers, the best one, I think, is Candide's Overture by Leonard Bernstein. Candide was a musical theater piece that Bernstein wrote, and it was not a big success in its first iteration on Broadway. It was later revived by Hal Prince and slightly rewritten in terms of not just the music, but also the book and the lyrics, and was much, much more successful. And now it's considered one of Bernstein's greatest accomplishments. It tells the story of Voltaire's book Candide, about a young man and his love, Candide and his love Cunegonde, and how they're taught young in life by Dr. Pangloss that all is for the best in this best of all possible worlds. And then they go out into the world and find that is just sadness and disease and sorrow at every turn. And at the end of the piece, Candide comes to the conclusion that everyone is responsible for their own decisions, their own choices in life, and making their own gardens grow. Now, the overture to Candide is absolutely delightful. Bernstein originally wrote it for a pit orchestra for the Broadway production, and loved the piece so much that he then orchestrated it for full symphony orchestra, premiering it with the New York Philharmonic in the early 1960s. It's sparkling, it's fun, it's quick, and it features some melodies from the play itself, which I guess is traditional for Broadway shows, certainly of that period. And so you begin with a fanfare from the brass, and this is from the piece that Pangloss sings early on in the play, singing about his theory that all is for the best in this best of all possible worlds. Then you'll hear a contrasting theme, a much more lyrical theme. This is the duet between Candide and Cunegonde early on in the show. And then finally, at the end, you'll hear a snippet of music from Glitter and Be listen to me, Glitter and Be Gay, which is Cunegonde's aria later on in the piece, where she's in captivity and singing and bemoaning her fate, and then thinking, well, maybe things aren't all that bad, and she sings this laughter section, ha 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 ha, and that's what you'll hear at the end of the Candide Overture. I think it's a delightful way to start off this program. In fact, I think it's a delightful way to start off any program. I hope you will enjoy this broadcast of this Masterworks concert, and once again, I hope everyone is staying safe. I hope everyone is staying healthy. And I very, very much hope that we will be back playing music live for you in the Tampa Bay area very, very soon.